right, Alexander. The this act of the clown show, of the theatrical play that we've called impeachment, which has had 2, maybe 3 acts. If you go back to Russiagate, you have Ukrainegate, and now you have this thing. I don't even know what this is about. Incitement, as ridiculous as it has become. Anyway, this act has finished. Obviously, Trump was acquitted. You had 7 Republican senators who turned on Trump, and you had a very bizarre, and I don't know why he did it, a very bizarre speech from Mitch McConnell, the GOP leader. Very bizarre speech by Mitch McConnell after he acquitted Trump, after everything had already been done. He decided to throw Trump under the bus and just completely obliterate Trump. I mean, he just lashed out at him. And this is just a completely bizarre, unwise move from Mitch McConnell. Trump also issued a statement, by the way, and to paraphrase it, he said, this is par for the course. You know, they've been going after me, he said, since the beginning. He's right. He says, once again, this was a huge witch hunt. He's right. He said he believes in the American First agenda, the American people. And he pretty much said that he's going to be back better than ever, and this movement is going to continue to grow and be stronger than ever. And I agree with that. I'm still trying to figure out, why did they go through with this? Why did they do this? I mean, both the Democrats and the Republicans, the House and the Senate. And why did Mitch McConnell decide to open his mouth and completely destroy his future by lashing out at Trump? Something is up, because Mitch McConnell usually is a pretty calculating, ruthless, sinister guy. This speech was very dumb, I imagine, unless I'm missing something.
Well, I think we can speculate, and I think these are going to be informed speculations, which may explain some of what Mitch McConnell was up to. But can I just first of all say that, of course, the outcome yesterday was, in legal terms, the correct one. The whole impeachment was completely bizarre. We had a first day when, as we discussed in an earlier programme, the defence lawyers made a pig's dinner of the constitutional arguments. It looks to me as if they just hadn't really prepared them. And your point about these being trial lawyers and being able to deal with the trial issues much better was absolutely borne out. I mean, they dealt with the trial issues, the actual case itself, I thought, extremely well. The Democrats, the House impeachment managers, spent 2 days presenting no actual evidence of substance at all, no witnesses, no sworn testimony. It was all based on, movies and press reports and attempts to stir up recollections of people in Congress about what had happened on the 6th of January. And also we had, extraordinarily manipulative and bizarre language calling the president our commander-in-chief. President is not the commander-in-chief. He is the commander-in-chief of the US armed forces, trying to insinuate that he somehow gave orders to these individuals who entered the Congress building, when in fact, there's no visible chain of command. Speculating wildly about things that Donald Trump didn't or may not have done, as this incursion into the Congress building was happening. But it's all speculation and rumor, because it's not based, again, as I said, on any witness evidence. Then trying to pivot forward to talk, luridly about what he might do in the future, and how if we don't impeach him, he could do all sorts of things in the future. And of course, we don't, in democratic and law-abiding countries, convict people for what they might do at some future time. We prosecute them and convict them for things they have actually done. It was a mess. It was one of the weirdest, strangest, most ludicrous, most disorganized prosecutions I have ever seen. In fact, it wasn't any sort of prosecution, meaningful prosecution at all. By contrast, the defense team, they took just 3 hours to basically demolish the whole prosecution case. They showed us their film, in which we had all these Democrats saying very similar things and using identical words to the ones Trump used. They reminded everybody about the events of the summer, which they were entirely within their rights to do. And in fact, it was an extremely effective and very well thought out performance from the defence. Andrew McCarthy, by the way, thinks the same, and he thinks so poorly of the prosecution case that he said that, in fact, had that been a conventional criminal trial, what the defence would have done after such a shambolic presentation was, give a 3-second comment. The defence rests, because no case was actually established and the judge would have dismissed. Now that's, by the way, said by Andrew McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, an old-style Republican, one who thought that Donald Trump ought to have been impeached. But clearly he was totally unimpressed by this ludicrous trial, and that we had this utterly farcical moment after the evidence has been presented, when the Democrats, realizing that their case had basically fallen apart, suddenly say they want to call this witness, who's always been a witness, who's always been there, this Republican representative who claims to have overheard a conversation between Trump and McCarthy, the leader of the Republicans in the House. Bear in mind, what this person claims to have overheard is hearsay. So you're actually manoeuvring to call this person to give hearsay evidence. You're not actually looking to subpoena McCarthy himself, but there we go, that's what they were going to do. Desperate attempt to try and stitch something together at the last moment. And then it all rapidly fell apart when the defence team said, well, if that's what you want to do, that we're going to call 100 witnesses of our own, which might have actually protracted the impeachment even further, complicating even more Biden's attempt to get his legislation through the Senate. We're not seeing much of that either at the moment, but that's another story. And at the same time, perhaps exposing even more holes in the prosecution case. If that prosecution case had been a Swiss cheese, it would have had so many holes. There would have been all holes and no cheese. I mean, it was a mess, a total mess. And that begs the question about why this case was brought at all. And that brings us to McConnell's comments. I'm going to say what I think. I think there was a deal done right at the beginning of this thing. I think McConnell underestimated the strength of pro-Trump feeling in the Republican Party. He wanted to see Trump impeached, and I think he quietly did a deal with the Democrats whereby he said, if you bring forward this impeachment, we will support it in return for, well, who knows what. That deal then fell apart because, of course, the Democrats both made a mess of their case, and because it became obvious to McConnell that the Republican base was firmly behind Donald Trump. So he then had to row back on all the commitments he gave to the Democrats. He sabotaged the Democrats' attempts to arrange a trial whilst the Senate, before Trump was while Trump was still president. He claimed that he was doing that because the Senate was not in session and couldn't be called. In fact, he made no attempt to call the Senate into session, and then he hid behind the fact that as a result, the trial had been postponed through his own actions until after Donald Trump had left office, in order to justify his vote to acquit, even though he then went on to say that, in fact, he thought that Trump was guilty. So he is, I mean, it looks so incoherent, so bizarre, so wrong. But as I say, it's the classic maneuver of a politician who's said things in private, made deals in private, taken on commitments in private, which he cannot honour, and so he comes up with forms of words in which he tries to appease both sides. I think, on the contrary, everybody is going to be angry with him. The Democrats are furious with him because they say if he had the strength of his convictions, he should have voted with them. The Republican base is furious with him because they see rightly that he's been disloyal to their president. And of course, the Republicans who actually did vote for the impeachment, both in the House, Liz Cheney and those people, and in the Senate, Richard Burr and all those people, they must feel that McConnell has left them twisting in the wind. So a disastrous performance of the Democrats, a disastrous performance by McConnell, and I predict and I expect that this thing is going to leave Trump stronger than he was before.
Okay, so we said it a while back that McConnell most likely made a deal with Schumer and Pelosi in order to go after Trump and to somehow dismantle the America First movement, because it was a direct threat to McConnell's power and his hold of the GOP. We really did say that, and that's exactly what it looks like. We even have some evidence. We have various pieces of evidence, but even evidence that came out a few days ago, where you have a Michigan State Majority Leader who said he was caught on a recording saying that the Capitol takeover was staged and a hoax. So you have that as well. He hasn't really walked back his words either. He's apologized for what he said, but he hasn't walked back his words. It's Michigan State Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, and he was caught on camera telling officials from the Hillside County Republican Party that the Capitol takeover was staged and a hoax. So, I mean, we do have various pieces of evidence that, once again, says that everything that happened on January 6th, at a minimum, needs a real investigation. I mean, a real investigation, not this clown kangaroo court stuff. I mean, a real investigation, because nothing is what it seems. And another thing is, you have the same tricks that the Democrats and the Republicans pulled in the past that they pulled with this. And I'll name two. Let me see, maybe three. I'll name two tricks. With Russiagate, they knew exactly what was going on from 2017. Lindsey Graham, McConnell, they saw all the evidence of Steele and the dossier. They knew it was a hoax, but they went on with it. Don't impeach Mueller because he's a man of integrity. If Trump impeaches him, we're going to impeach Trump. They pulled this trick before. So we know that they've worked with Democrats to go after Trump. They did that. They also pulled the whole, I heard on a phone call that Trump told McCarthy this. Let's not forget in Ukraine Gate, we had the whole, what was his name? David Holmes, where he said he overheard President Trump speaking to Ambassador Sondland. And he overheard the Sondland conversation, while he was sitting at a table. He just overheard it from the speaker. He wasn't like actually on the phone call. He overheard Trump's voice via the speaker on that mobile device. So the guy has incredible hearing. And we had the same thing. I mean, they use the same damn tricks over and over and over again. And it's about time that someone calls them out and someone stuffs them. And I'll read you a tweet as to what's going on here and how people feel about this, because their tricks are not working this time. This is a tweet. It says, there's a tweet from Donald Trump Jr., who says, if only McConnell was so righteous as the Democrats trampled Trump and the Republicans while pushing Russia collusion BS for 3 years, or while Dems incited 10 months of violence, arson, and rioting, yeah, then he just sat back and did Jack, S-H-I-T. And a response to that tweet from an account called Free America Live says, Leader McConnell exemplifies the weakness of the Republicans in the U.S. Senate. Time to clean house of these clowns and get true conservatives who will fight this attempted hostile takeover by radical socialist Democrats. So, I mean, people are starting to call them out. This completely backfired on them.
Well, absolutely. I mean, what McConnell was trying to do was purge Trump from the Republican Party and purge Trump from his support and his supporters from the Republican Party. What he may achieve is that he gets purged instead. I mean, he was the assassin who, wielded the knife but couldn't strike. But he's now been caught wielding the knife. What this incident, by the way, also shows is the obsessive loathing of Trump and of the Republican base. Because, all those people who voted for Trump, the 75 million people who voted for Trump, the extent to which the leadership of their own party hates them is most extraordinary. It's very, very weird because, as you rightly say, McConnell, sits back. He says very little when, Russiagate goes on. He doesn't criticise it. He doesn't attack it. He gives it traction. He supports Mueller. That doesn't work. He then sits back through the summer when we have all those things going on in the American cities. He says nothing about that either, or nothing of any great substance about it. But then he comes along, fiery denunciations of Trump, all sorts of attempts to do deals behind the scenes with Democrats of that. I have no doubt at all, actually. And of course, he's exposed himself. He's now visibly seen for what he is. If you are an intriguer, intrigue is something you do effectively in the shadows. When you're caught doing it in daylight and, in front of an audience of millions, then of course you are exposed and power drains away from you. You can't carry out intrigues like this behind the, not behind the scenes, but in front of the scenes. It just doesn't work. So there we go. I think McConnell comes out of this a hugely diminished figure. And I think that what we're going to see is that come 2022, when there will be a swing in the Republican Party, there will be a swing to the Republicans. Always happens in the after the presidential election. That in the next midterm elections, there's a swing to the opposition party. We will see that the Republicans will probably regain control of the House, probably regain control of the Senate. But they won't want McConnell in charge anymore. He has blown himself up. It's really been extraordinary to see. And the fact, it doesn't surprise me because he's not truly a democratic politician in the conventional sense. He's not one of those people who goes out, campaigns openly to the American people, talks to them, does sort of things. Maybe once upon a time back in the 1980s he did, but he's become so used to pulling the strings behind the scenes in the Capitol building that he has lost those political skills, if he ever had them, which he once had, and as a result he's lost contact with the true life of the country and with the pulse of the Republican base. Anyway, a shambolic and disastrous affair, which comes out that all of those who organised and orchestrated, they all come out very badly from it. I just wanted to add my complete agreement to what you said about the lack of a proper investigation. We've had no investigation, meaningful investigation, at least no meaningful public investigation of what happened on the 6th of January at all. When the Democrats were saying they wanted to call a witness, and Trump's team said, fine, let's call hundreds of witnesses, they pull back. They're scared. They don't want this thing investigated properly. What was the problem? If you want to call hearsay evidence, hearsay evidence, you can't really call that in a criminal case like this, but you can apparently in an impeachment. But if you want to call meaningless impeachment evidence, what prevented you doing that? What prevented you, by the way, calling McCarthy himself? Who was the person who was actually on the call? Maybe we should listen to him, not to somebody who has this extraordinary hearing and can hear what was said to McCarthy. Call McCarthy himself. Perhaps he can explain what happened. Remember what actually happened when they came up with the story about about Lee, Senator Lee, and what he was supposed to have overheard. And it turned out, actually, his comments, which had been published in the media, had been misrepresented. And the Democrats had to row back on that and admit that this actually important part of this nonsense case, I can't really call it a case, narrative, if you like, that they'd stitched together, wasn't even true. And the reason that happened was because it hadn't been investigated. They hadn't called in Lee and actually asked him, taken a deposition from him, or heard from him about what he said. They didn't actually speak to the senator that Lee said that he'd overheard. And when they did speak to that senator, I'm sorry, I forget his name, Tuberville or something like that, he said, well, actually, he doesn't remember when the call from Trump to him actually took place. So that whole narrative structure that they constructed was completely without foundation. That's what happens when something isn't investigated properly and when you rely on media reports. Media reports are not evidence. They're not evidence in any law court. They should not be evidence in any impeachment proceedings. And of course, more often than not, especially when they relate to Donald Trump, they're wrong. But that's what they did. They made this shambolic attempt to impeach Trump on this basis. They did this on the basis of all sorts of pacts and agreements and, whatever it was between themselves and McConnell, and then it all fell apart.
Yeah, they just make stuff up. But I wonder if the Russiagate, Ukrainegate, and those two, one was a quasi-impeachment, the other one was a full-on impeachment. I wonder if for McConnell and the Republicans, the Rhinos, Lindsey Grahams, and all these establishment guys, I wonder if for them those procedures were a way to box Trump in and to secure the fact that Trump wouldn't go after them in his 4 years in office. In other words, they used those the Russiagate thing and the Ukraine impeachment as a shield so that Trump doesn't purge these guys from the Republican Party. Because when I look back on it now, I say to myself, if I was Trump, I would have, the minute I got into office, I would have found a way to just get rid of these guys because they're just a bunch of rats. But he never did it. And I sit there and I say, why didn't he do it? Was Trump just stupid enough? Was just dumb? He didn't want to do it? No, not at all. I think to myself, he couldn't do it because they always had him in some sort of impeachment trap. So he needed them. He needed their support. Otherwise, they would have impeached him. So I'm starting to think to myself that, they went along with the impeachment, not so much also to purge themselves of Trump and to hit at Trump. But I think that McConnell used both Russiagate and Ukrainegate as a way to shield himself and the other rhinos from Trump actually reforming the GOP because they needed their support. He needed their support in order for the impeachment to fail in the case of Ukrainegate and for Russiagate to be completely debunked and to dissipate. So he needed them. I'm starting to think that that's why they went along with Russiagate. That's why they went along with Ukrainegate, not because they didn't want Trump to purge the GOP of these jokers.
I think that's entirely right. Now, can I just say, I think at the very beginning, I think when Russiagate was first being floated in the autumn and winter of 2016 and the winter and spring of 2017, there were some very foolish and out of touch people in the Republican leadership who perhaps thought that there might be something in those allegations. I'm thinking specifically, by the way, of Richard Burr, who voted for Trump's impeachment at the end of the so-called trial. And I can remember the kind of things he was saying at the time. And it did seem to me as if he had both Russia on the brain and Trump on the brain and was inclined to believe these fantasies. But I think after this very disastrous performance that Comey made when he came to the House Intelligence Committee in March 2017. I remember it very well. We covered it very, very closely. I think at that point, more and more Republicans began to have doubts. Certainly Devin Nunes did. And then by the summer of 2017, there was never any doubt at all. I mean, everybody in Congress who was interested in Russiagate, which has been presumably all of them, would have known that there was no reality to it. So they nonetheless kept it going for a further 2 years. Why did they keep it going for a further 2 years, even though they knew by the summer of 2017 that there was no reality to it? They did it because they didn't like Donald Trump, and they wanted to stop him doing the things he wanted to do. They didn't want him to take steps with US foreign policy that they didn't agree with. They didn't want him to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq. They didn't want him to pursue a rapprochement with Russia, which is now very clear. Trump wanted to do that in order to peel the Russians away from their strategic partnership, alliance, if you like, with the Chinese. It was not because he's infatuated by Russia. It's because he was pursuing a policy which he wanted to pursue on behalf of the United States. But they didn't want him to do that, so they stopped him. And, of course, as you absolutely rightly say, they did not want the Donald Trump MAGA movement to take over the Republican Party, because people like Romney and McConnell and Ryan would have no place in a party like that. So they kept this utterly fictitious narrative of Donald Trump, the agent of the Kremlin, alive for those further 2 years, hobbling his presidency in the process. And what a disaster that's been. It's been an absolute failure, because Donald Trump did come into the presidency with a coherent program and a coherent reform agenda, but in a very interesting shift in the US if he'd done that. And instead, the blob, the swamp, call it what you like, was able to stop him by conducting this fabricated narrative of him being, tied up with Russia throughout the time that he was president. They did the same, of course, with Ukrainegate, and we've discussed how that looks like increasingly like a diversionary exercise. In fact, they've been trying to impeach Trump from even before he became president. That was another point, by the way, that Trump's defense team made very powerfully and very well. I mean, there's been this constant threat to Donald Trump's position, which it's now increasingly clear is not related to any actual crimes or misdemeanors that he's alleged to have committed, because these people have never really been able to crystallize any charge based on anything. It's because, one, they don't like Donald Trump, and two, they fear him and fear what he represents.
All right. We will leave it there. Alexander McCurse, thank you very much. Guys, look for us on BitChute, on Odyssey, and on Rumble. You'll find those links down below. Look for Alexander's channel. You'll find that link down below. Look for my channel. You'll find that link down below. PayPal, Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Bitcoin. Your help is always appreciated. And of course, go to the Duran shop and pick up some great merch. That is also very much appreciated. Maybe a hoodie, maybe a t-shirt. We got all kinds of great stuff.
And magic mugs, our famous magic mugs, our great hats. Here's one, by the way, which I've been wearing a lot. It's freezing weather, with the flag of France. I think you can just about see it there. And there's lots of French people near where I live, and they've been absolutely thrilled to see me there with the flag of a country that I greatly love. But you can find amazing things in our shop: hats, hoodies, sweatshirts like the one I'm also wearing with the flag of Scotland, t-shirts, and you support the Duran by buying these wonderful products from our shop, and you'll be the delighted owner when you buy them. And at the same time, please support our channels. Remember to subscribe, look us up on our other platforms, and support us as you can. And please join us for our next broadcast.
All right. Take care, everybody.